Margaret sat quietly in the corner of the busy restaurant, her weathered hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee. She had been traveling for 3 days straight, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. Her simple cotton dress was wrinkled from the long bus ride, and her gray hair had escaped from its modest bun. To everyone around her, she looked like just another tired, ordinary woman trying to stretch a single cup of coffee as long as possible. The Golden Fork restaurant was known for attracting wealthy customers and important business people. The walls were decorated with expensive paintings and crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Most customers wore designer clothes and expensive jewelry. Margaret's simple appearance stood out like a sore thumb among the well-dressed crowd. She had stopped here only because her bus had broken down 3 blocks away, and she needed a quiet place to wait for the next one. The restaurant seemed warm and inviting from the outside, though she worried it might be too expensive for her limited budget. Still, she had enough money for a coffee and maybe a small sandwich. The young waitress, Jessica, noticed Margaret immediately. Jessica had been working at the Golden Fork for 2 years and prided herself on recognizing the type of customers who belonged there. Margaret definitely did not fit the usual profile. Her clothes looked like they came from a discount store, and she carried a worn canvas bag instead of a designer purse. Jessica watched Margaret from across the room, whispering to her co-worker about the strange old woman who seemed out of place. She assumed Margaret was probably homeless or looking for handouts. The restaurant had a reputation to maintain, and Jessica worried that other customers might be uncomfortable with Margaret's presence. After Margaret had been sitting for about an hour, Jessica finally approached her table. Her tone was polite, but firm as she explained that the restaurant had a policy about customers occupying tables for extended periods. She suggested that Margaret might be more comfortable at the diner down the street, which was more suited to her needs. Margaret looked up with kind eyes and nodded understandingly. She had encountered this type of treatment before and had learned not to take it personally. She began gathering her belongings slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. As she reached for her coffee cup, her sleeve rolled up slightly, revealing something that made Jessica take a step back. On Margaret's wrist was a small, faded tattoo that looked like a military insignia. It was partially hidden by her sleeve, but Jessica caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a special forces symbol. For a moment, Jessica hesitated, wondering if she had misjudged the situation. But she quickly dismissed the thought, assuming it was probably just some old decoration that didn't mean anything important. Margaret stood up quietly, left a generous tip on the table despite the poor treatment, and walked toward the exit. She moved with a subtle confidence that seemed at odds with her humble appearance. There was something about the way she carried herself that suggested she had faced much more challenging situations than being asked to leave a restaurant. As Margaret reached the door, she noticed a commotion near the kitchen area. Several staff members were gathered around someone, and she could hear urgent voices discussing a medical emergency. Her instincts kicked in immediately, and she paused at the doorway, torn between leaving as requested and offering help where it might be needed. The commotion in the kitchen grew louder as Margaret hesitated by the door. She could hear someone calling for help, and every instinct in her body told her to respond. Despite being asked to leave, she couldn't ignore the sounds of distress coming from the back of the restaurant. A young cook had collapsed while preparing food, and he was having trouble breathing. The kitchen staff stood around him, unsure of what to do. Someone had called for an ambulance, but it would take at least 15 minutes to arrive in the heavy downtown traffic. The cook's face was turning pale, and his breathing was becoming more labored. Margaret quietly approached the group, her medical training from years ago automatically taking over. She had served as a combat medic in several dangerous missions, though she never talked about those experiences. Without making a fuss, she knelt beside the young man and quickly assessed his condition. She recognized the signs of a severe allergic reaction immediately. The cook's throat was swelling and he needed help right away. Margaret calmly asked one of the staff members to find an EpiPen in the first aid kit while she helped position the cook to make breathing easier. Her hands were steady and sure as she worked, showing no sign of panic or uncertainty. Jessica watched from a distance, amazed by how Margaret had transformed from a seemingly helpless old woman into someone who clearly knew exactly what she was doing. Margaret's voice was calm but authoritative as she gave instructions to the kitchen staff, telling them how to help and what to prepare for when the ambulance arrived. Within minutes, Margaret had stabilized the cook's condition using basic first aid techniques and the medication from the restaurant's emergency kit. She stayed with him, monitoring his breathing and pulse, speaking to him in a gentle but confident voice to keep him calm. Her presence seemed to have a calming effect on everyone around her. When the paramedics finally arrived, they were impressed by the professional quality of care the cook had received. Margaret quietly briefed them on what had happened and what steps she had taken, using medical terminology that surprised everyone listening. The paramedics treated her with obvious respect, recognizing that she had significant medical knowledge. As the ambulance prepared to leave, the cook grabbed Margaret's hand and thanked her weakly. He told her that he felt much better and that he was certain she had saved his life. Margaret smiled gently and told him to take care of himself, reminding him to always carry his emergency medication. The kitchen staff gathered around Margaret, asking where she had learned such impressive medical skills. She simply smiled and said she had picked up a few things over the years. She was modest about her actions, treating the life-saving incident as if it were just a normal part of her day. Jessica stood nearby, feeling embarrassed about how she had treated Margaret earlier. She realized she had made a terrible mistake in judging this woman based only on her appearance. There was clearly much more to Margaret than met the eye, and Jessica began to wonder what other secrets this humble woman might be carrying. After the ambulance left, the restaurant manager, Mr. Harrison, approached Margaret with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. He had witnessed the entire incident and was amazed by her professional handling of the emergency. He insisted that Margaret stay for a complimentary meal as a token of appreciation for saving his employee's life. Margaret politely accepted the offer, though she seemed more concerned about the young cook's well-being than receiving any recognition for her actions. She asked Mr. Harrison to keep her updated on the cook's condition and to make sure he received proper medical follow-up care. Her genuine concern for a stranger's welfare impressed everyone who overheard the conversation. As Margaret returned to her table, other customers began to look at her with new interest and respect. Word had spread quickly through the restaurant about what she had done, and people were curious about this mysterious woman who had appeared so ordinary but possessed such extraordinary skills. Jessica approached Margaret's table, this time with a completely different attitude. She apologized sincerely for her earlier behavior, admitting that she had judged Margaret unfairly based on appearances. Margaret accepted the apology graciously, telling Jessica that she understood and held no hard feelings about the incident. During their conversation, Jessica noticed more details about Margaret that she had missed before. Despite her simple clothes, Margaret's posture was perfectly straight, and she moved with a precision that suggested military training. Her eyes were constantly aware of everything happening around her, scanning the room in a way that seemed automatic and professional. Margaret ordered a simple meal, but Jessica was determined to make up for her earlier rudeness by providing exceptional service. As she brought Margaret's food, she couldn't help but ask about the medical skills she had displayed. Margaret explained that she had learned first aid during her years of service, though she didn't elaborate on exactly what kind of service that had been. As they talked, Jessica's attention was drawn to Margaret's wrist again. This time, she got a clearer look at the tattoo that had caught her eye earlier. It wasn't just any military insignia. It appeared to be something much more specialized and significant. The design included symbols that Jessica didn't recognize, but they looked important and official. Margaret noticed Jessica looking at her wrist and casually pulled her sleeve down to cover the tattoo. She didn't seem bothered by the attention, but it was clear that she preferred to keep that part of her past private. Jessica sensed that there were many stories behind that simple marking, stories that Margaret wasn't ready to share. The restaurant began to fill with the lunch crowd, and Margaret prepared to leave to catch her bus. She thanked Mr. Harrison again for his hospitality and left another generous tip for Jessica, despite having been treated poorly when she first arrived. Her kindness and forgiveness made a lasting impression on the young waitress. As Margaret gathered her belongings, a distinguished, older gentleman entered the restaurant. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with obvious authority. Several staff members immediately recognized him as Colonel Richards, a frequent customer who was known to be an important figure in the local military community. He was respected throughout the city for his service record and his current work with veteran affairs. Colonel Richards entered the Golden Fork restaurant with his usual confident stride, greeting the staff members who knew him well. He was a tall, distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His reputation in the community was impeccable, and he was known for his dedication to honoring military service members and veterans. As he was being seated at his regular table, Colonel Richards noticed Margaret preparing to leave. Something about her caught his attention immediately, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. There was something familiar about the way she moved, something that triggered his military instincts and made him take a second look. Margaret was putting on her worn jacket when she accidentally knocked over the salt shaker on her table. As she reached to clean up the spill, her sleeve rode up once again, exposing the tattoo on her wrist. From his position across the restaurant, Colonel Richards caught sight of the marking, and his expression changed dramatically. The colonel's eyes widened as he recognized the distinctive symbol on Margaret's wrist. It wasn't just any military tattoo. It was the mark of the Deathstalkers, one of the most elite and secretive special operations units in military history. The unit was so classified that most people had never heard of it, and those who had knew better than to discuss it publicly. Colonel Richards had spent 40 years in military service, rising through the ranks and working with various special forces units. He had encountered Deathstalker operatives only a few times in his career, and each time had been during the most dangerous and critical missions imaginable. The unit was legendary for taking on impossible assignments that no one else could handle. The Deathstalkers were known as Reapers because they were sent into situations where survival seemed impossible, yet they somehow managed to complete their missions and return alive. They were the military's most closely guarded secret, and their identities were protected at the highest levels of government. The tattoo Margaret bore was not something that could be faked or copied. It was earned through trials that few people could even imagine. Colonel Richards stood up immediately, his heart racing as he realized he was looking at a living legend. Deathstalker operatives were so rare that many military personnel went their entire careers without meeting one. The fact that one was sitting in this ordinary restaurant, being treated like a common customer, was almost unbelievable. He walked directly toward Margaret's table, his military bearing evident in every step. Other customers noticed the colonel's sudden urgency and wondered what could have captured his attention so completely. Margaret looked up as he approached, and for a moment, their eyes met with the understanding that passes between warriors who have seen combat. Margaret's posture subtly shifted as she recognized the colonel's rank and bearing. She could tell immediately that he was a career military man, someone who would understand the significance of what he had just seen. Her expression remained calm, but there was a slight tension in her shoulders that suggested she was preparing for whatever conversation was about to unfold. Colonel Richards stopped at Margaret's table and, without saying a word, gave her a crisp military salute. The gesture was so unexpected and respectful that it caught the attention of everyone nearby. Margaret stood and returned the salute with perfect precision, her movements revealing the disciplined training that still lived within her despite her civilian appearance. The entire restaurant fell silent as customers and staff witnessed this strange exchange between the distinguished colonel and the woman who had seemed so ordinary just moments before. Jessica watched in amazement, finally, beginning to understand that Margaret was someone truly extraordinary, someone whose true identity she could never have guessed from appearances alone. After the formal salute, Colonel Richards asked Margaret if he could join her for a moment. She nodded quietly, and they both sat down at her table. The colonel's demeanor was respectful and humble, completely different from how most people had been treating Margaret throughout the day. He spoke in a low voice, mindful of the curious ears around them. The colonel introduced himself properly and explained that he had recognized the significance of her tattoo. He told her that in his 4 decades of military service he had only met 3 Deathstalker operatives, and each encounter had left a lasting impression on him. He expressed his deep respect for her service and thanked her for the sacrifices she had undoubtedly made for their country. Margaret listened politely but remained modest about her past. She confirmed that she had served in special operations, but deflected most of the colonel's questions about specific missions or experiences. Her humility was genuine. She clearly saw herself as someone who had simply done her job, not as a hero deserving special recognition. Colonel Richards shared some of his own military background, mentioning several classified operations where Deathstalker units had played crucial roles. He was careful not to reveal sensitive information, but Margaret understood the references and nodded knowingly. Their conversation was filled with the kind of mutual respect that exists only between veterans who have faced life-and-death situations. The restaurant staff and customers watched this interaction with growing amazement. Mr. Harrison, the manager, had never seen Colonel Richards show such deference to anyone. Jessica stood nearby, feeling increasingly embarrassed about how she had initially treated Margaret. The contrast between her earlier dismissive attitude and the colonel's profound respect was stark and uncomfortable. As they talked, Colonel Richards learned that Margaret was traveling to visit the grave of a fallen comrade who had died in a mission they had completed together 20 years earlier. She made this pilgrimage every year on the anniversary of his death, though she had never told anyone about this private ritual. Her dedication to honoring her fallen friend revealed the depth of her character and loyalty. The colonel was deeply moved by Margaret's story and insisted on helping her with her travel arrangements. He learned that she had been taking buses and staying in budget motels to make the journey, despite the fact that she could easily have flown or stayed in better accommodations. Her choice to travel modestly was not about money, but about maintaining the humble lifestyle she had chosen after leaving the military. Colonel Richards discreetly arranged for a car service to take Margaret to her destination and made reservations for her at a comfortable hotel near the cemetery she planned to visit. Margaret initially protested these generous gestures, but the colonel explained that it would be his honor to ensure that a Deathstalker operative received the respect and care she deserved. Word of Margaret's true identity began to spread quietly through the restaurant. The kitchen staff who had witnessed her life-saving medical skills now understood why she had been so calm and professional during the emergency. Her actions made perfect sense in light of her military background and specialized training. Jessica approached their table hesitantly, carrying a fresh cup of coffee for Margaret and a small plate of the restaurant's finest desserts. She apologized again for her earlier behavior, this time with tears in her eyes as she realized she had been rude to someone who had risked her life countless times to protect people like her. Margaret accepted the apology graciously and told Jessica that she held no grudges. The colonel stood up and announced to the restaurant that Margaret's meal would be his treat and that any Deathstalker operative would always be welcome at the Golden Fork with his personal guarantee. His words carried weight throughout the establishment, ensuring that Margaret would never face discrimination there again. Before Margaret left the restaurant, Colonel Richards made one more gesture that surprised everyone present. He asked if she would be willing to meet with a group of young veterans he mentored through a local support program. Many of them were struggling to adjust to civilian life after their military service, and he believed that meeting someone with Margaret's experience and wisdom could provide them with inspiration and guidance. Margaret considered the request carefully. She had always preferred to keep her military past private, but she recognized the importance of helping fellow veterans who might be facing challenges she had once experienced herself. After a moment of reflection, she agreed to speak with the group, though she insisted on keeping the focus on supporting the young veterans rather than discussing her own achievements. The colonel provided Margaret with his contact information and promised to arrange the meeting for when she returned from her pilgrimage. He also gave her his personal card, telling her to call if she ever needed anything at all. The gesture was not just polite courtesy, it was a sincere offer of support from one veteran to another. As Margaret finally prepared to leave, the entire restaurant staff gathered to see her off. Mr. Harrison personally escorted her to the door, expressing his gratitude once more for saving his employee's life and apologizing for any discomfort she had experienced earlier. He also provided her with a card for free meals whenever she might pass through the area again. Jessica walked Margaret to the car that Colonel Richards had arranged, carrying her modest travel bag. During their short walk, Margaret offered some gentle advice to the young woman about not judging people too quickly based on appearances. She spoke kindly, without any trace of resentment, focusing on the lesson rather than dwelling on how she had been treated. The driver of the car service was a veteran himself, and when Colonel Richards quietly explained who his passenger was, the driver's attitude immediately became one of deep respect and honor. He insisted on adjusting the car's temperature to Margaret's comfort and asked if she needed to stop anywhere along the way. As the car pulled away from the restaurant, Margaret waved goodbye to the small crowd that had gathered to see her off. She looked exactly the same as when she had first entered the Golden Fork hours earlier. The same simple dress, the same modest appearance. But everyone who watched her leave now understood that they had been in the presence of someone truly remarkable. Jessica stood watching until the car disappeared from sight, thinking about the profound lesson she had learned that day. She realized that heroes don't always look like heroes, and that the most extraordinary people often choose to live the most ordinary lives. She made a personal promise to never again judge someone based solely on their appearance or circumstances. Colonel Richards remained in the restaurant for his usual lunch, but he spent most of the time telling other customers about the honor of meeting a Deathstalker operative. He was careful not to reveal any classified information, but he wanted people to understand that they had witnessed something special. His respect for Margaret was evident in every word he spoke about her. The story of Margaret's visit became legendary at the Golden Fork restaurant. The staff would often tell new employees about the humble woman who had saved a life and turned out to be one of the military's most elite warriors. The tale served as a reminder that true heroism often comes in unexpected packages, and that treating everyone with respect and kindness is not just good manners but a moral responsibility. Margaret continued on her journey to honor her fallen comrade, carrying with her the knowledge that she had not only helped save a young man's life, but had also taught valuable lessons about dignity, service, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to see the true worth of every person.